Welcome to this week's Eccentric Minute, brought to you by Eccentric. This week we're going to cover the K-Box RDL, another staple with the Eccentric K-Box. Make sure that you're able to get to full extension with the strap, so you may need it to go a little bit longer than you would initially guess. And from there, I really like to make sure that the middle of my foot is around right where the gap where the strap goes through, so that we can make sure that the tether goes straight up and down. From that point, give the wheel a spin, push your hips back, your shoulders locked in, and really work back into those hips. This is a great alternative to using the barbell or a dumbbell for the RDL. Give it a try. It's one your athletes are sure to love. I really hope you enjoyed this week's Eccentric Minute. Make sure you check them out at eccentric.com to find out everything you need about the K-Box and the K-Pulley. Being a strength and conditioning professional requires constant pursuit of better knowledge, better methods, and better means. But what if there was a place where strength and conditioning coaches could learn from some of the most innovative practitioners in the world, such as Jeff Moyer, Lachlan Wilmot, William Wayland, James the Thinker Smith, and Kierwenham Flatt? Well, you could find multiple lectures from each of these top-level coaches and a few lectures and examples from yours truly as well, all in the Strength Coach Network. The Strength Coach Network is going to bring you well over 100 different lectures from some of the top practitioners in the world to be your one-stop shop for your continuing education and professional development. So hop on over to strengthcoachnetwork.com/CVASP today and get your 48-hour trial for only $1. That's strengthcoachnetwork.com/CVASPS to get your 48-hour trial for only $1. I look forward to seeing you in the Strength Coach Network.
Zach, thank you so much for spending the time with us today, bud.
I appreciate you having me on, Jay. It's a big honor to be on here. I know I grew up listening to this, coming up through the profession as an intern all the way up to where I'm at now, thankfully. So I'm just really happy to have me on, and you want to listen to what I have to say, because a lot of people don't. So hopefully they do.
One, thanks for dating me, coming up, through the profession when I was young, because we all were young at one point. But nah, man, before we get too far into this, man, let's let everybody know, who Zach is, where you are, and how you got to where you are today.
So I'm the associate head strength coach at Florida Atlantic University with football. Previously, I've been at Colorado State. I've been at Louisiana Monroe. I've been at University of Nevada, Ohio State, Marshall, and then I originally started there. I played at Marshall University. So that's kind of where I got my start. I got and fell into the profession. I'm originally from West Virginia. So that's kind of how I fell into it. I had some pretty good strength coaches there, and I started interning early on while I was playing there, and just kind of fell into the profession. I've been doing this stuff for a while, probably a little bit longer, and I got really lucky and got a fast track career because of my intern experience, kind of playing early on while I was doing it, and just got really lucky to be around some good people and good names, and kind of been really fortunate and really lucky and be in the right spot at the right time.
Yeah, but even with that, there's been a lot of things when it comes to growth and evaluation and developing some unique things that you've been able to do through your multiple stops. And one thing that a lot of people reach out to you about is, when we're looking at things when it comes to, return to sport and getting people back after, the unfortunate things that happen, especially in the game of football, that right now are probably being pointed out a little bit too much on social media when it comes to injuries. First of all, I think what's important to start with is, how did that become something that you really got intertwined in? Because I think that it's something that a lot of us like to talk about, but we don't necessarily get as deep in the weeds as we should.
Yeah, when it comes to that, for me, my biggest start, like in return to sport, return to competition, return to play, however you want to label it, for me, when I was playing, I was hurt a ton. I had 4 or 5 surgeries in my career, so I was always rehabbing, always spending time with my trainers and my PTs and my strength coaches, and way more time in strength, which probably wasn't why I wasn't very good, and I put a whistle and stopwatch in my hands pretty early. But that's how I kind of got started into it. And I was always starting asking questions, trying to figure stuff out. And then even early on as an intern for me, I was always kind of getting handed, hey, go do this. Hey, go take him and go do this. And very early on, I started working with kids one-on-one, working with like rehab kids and modifying kids. And everybody does at some point. And everywhere I kind of go, I got a little bit further along down the line. I got a little more advanced, got a little more progressions into it. And then eventually, of how I really kind of got started in the weeds is I used to help our DPT at Ohio State with it a lot. And I used to help when I was a professional intern there, I used to help one of our assistants a lot with one of those kids and training a lot of kids. Like I remember working with like Joe Burrow a lot, like when he broke his hand before he transferred, and he broke his hand and having to do like lat pull down manuals with the single arm man, like stuff like that. And then eventually got the program, kind of got my own ideas. And then eventually from there, it was more of, hey, like you're going to be the return to play guy at other places. And, you know, it's kind of trial by fire. You kind of figure it out. And it's trial by fire, and you kind of figure it out. You're like, hey, like, I think this is going to work. You try it, and you try to keep it as close as you can to what the actual team is doing, because that's what you're trying to return them to, whether it's training or competition. But for you in that aspect, the biggest thing I've learned from you is return to play has been the biggest benefit to my evolution in my career, because it's forced me to learn. It's forced me to ask questions. It's forced me to dive deeper into specific topics, and also broaden my horizons and not get into a specific like single site, like niche or whatever, to where I have to be able to answer a lot of questions in a lot of different areas. And every day, every year, there's new problems. Every athlete is different. And you start thinking about that and how that specific athlete's going to respond. And it kind of gives you a lot of tools in your tool belt to kind of solve different problems as they come. And as you know, every time you get a new athlete, there's usually a new problem. Like even though one injury may be the same, like how they present themselves with each athlete, a lot of times is different.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And I think that even more so when you look at those different levels, the different types of athlete, you know, at the different, I mean, like, you know, there's not a lot of teams that are going to, I mean, especially that locker room that you had that year at Ohio State. I mean, good grief, to be able to sit in one of those quarterback meetings. I mean, holy mackerel. Like people forget about like the four that they had there. Like the two red shirts were like studs other places too.
Yeah,
right?
I was really lucky to be allowed in that building every day in any capacity I was, even if it was sweeping the floors. I was really lucky, and I owe my career a lot to that place in itself, in terms of kind of as a jump pad, learning and kind of going forth. But absolutely, and every athlete, every situation, every school is going to present different issues with the kids, because again, you talk about genetic potential of the kids. You know, every kid's going to be a high responder, low responder. They might be somewhere in between, and what they're going to do, their needs are going to be different. So again, like some kids, like you just need to, hey, get them to game day, get them to Saturday, get them feeling good. And other kids, like it's a complete rebuild. Like you get a kid who comes in as a freshman with a torn ACL, and then from there, like you have to completely like transform this kid, not just rehab him, but you're taking him from point A to point all the way to point Z. And so every kid is different, like you just said. Like it really depends on the genetic potential of the kid and where they're at and what they've done, and their kind of like just their background as an athlete.
Yeah, and I think though that what's really neat nowadays is, you know, back before I was graybeard, you know, when I was just bearded, you know, it was basically just sitting there and talking and trying to figure things out, and you know, girth measurements and maybe some vertical jumps and maybe some times. But now you're able to really dive deeper into actual metrics and not just have an understanding of how they do X, Y, or Z, but like how you can do better to help them in that rehab process.
Yeah, absolutely. That's probably the biggest change I've made in my personal kind of thought process, and with return to play in the last 2 years or so, is how can we put an objective data into return to play versus just simply using the like coach's eye test, as I was taught early on, and kind of like, what do you see? Again, that's important too, but you look at, okay, what's their one rep max, the old school thinking of that, what's their 10-yard time, their fly 10 time, or how's it compared to the position group, the team averages, pre and post surgery, all those different things. Like those are simple. But now when you start looking at like GPS metrics using Catapult, using Polar, and you're matching the demands of the sport, okay, where are they at in their training? What does a training session in a team setting look like? What are the average high speed yards on an Excel day or max velocity day? Or if your staff does a ton of RSA, like how do I replicate the demands of that sport, that competition, that training setting, and how do I prepare the athlete to withstand that? Because if you're doing return to play correctly, the athlete should return to the team setting, to competition, to training in a better place than where they were previously before the injury, if you do it correctly. And even now, like the biggest training changes I've made in terms of objective data, again, is matching player load, high speed running, total yardage, output in terms of GPS to make sure they're able to withstand the capacity of training and practice. And then also double checking different stages of training with force plate data, okay? And having set metrics for each stage of training, whether it's early stage, mid stage, late stage. Okay, what are our progressions? Okay, whether it's single limb isometric testing to test imbalances, whether it's neuromuscular testing with the force deck, understanding eccentric duration, eccentric force rate of force development with a counter movement jump, or a 10-5 rebound jump, or a depth jump, or however you want to do it. Or I really got into the ASH test with one of my labrum kids this summer, and being able to, okay, and now we're able to effectively measure him throughout the training process. Okay, what is he lacking in? What arm angle is he lacking in? How are we changing that? And then from there, okay, now he's back into training. Okay, let's do every 2-3 weeks, every 3 weeks, let's do a checkup with him on season. Let's see how he's handling practice. Let's see how that shoulder stabilizing. Do we need to make modifications post return to play to keep him fresh, to keep him healthy, to keep stability in that shoulder, especially in a contact position of being an offensive lineman, that what he is and the demands of the sport and position, especially in a game like football. There's so many different factors that you deal with on a daily basis. But those are probably the biggest things I've made differently, and I've tried to answer those questions myself after talking with other people. And I think if you can do those things, you could put together a way better return to play and objective markers for your staff, your sports staff, and your sports medicine staff, where you create that holistic overview for the athlete, which is the optimal goal.
Yes. And I think one thing that you brought up there that is another spot that a lot of people tend to, at best, gloss over, and probably more realistically, they just skip, is the fact that it doesn't end right. Like, oh,
Absolutely.
we're back, we get you back, you can play, and you're done. There's a lot more to it after they they take the red jersey off and they're back at it, full activity.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's guys who are gonna need modifications, especially like lumbar kids. I find, like, again, like no lumbar return to play kid is exactly the same. Everyone's gonna respond different. Specific low back pain is gonna be different. Whether, I talk to Alvin Meal all the time about like Olympic lifting big guys, because if you have to Olympic lift them before they get them back in the sport, whether you like them or don't like them, you have to prepare them for the training session you're gonna do. Okay, so what are the differences based on limb length and things like that? So even if it's in training or practice, like there's always going to be, okay, what is this kid going to need modifications the rest of his career to keep him healthy and curate optimal positions for this kid for performance? But even then, if he doesn't, when he gets back, okay, what happens if he ends up rolling his ankle and he's a low back kid? Well, if he rolls his ankle, he's gonna end up having gait compensations. And what happens if that affects his low back? It affects the previous injury we just fixed. And now we have to start doing gait repatterning and motor patterning and different things like that. Or again, like I was just talking about the labrum kid, what happens if he doesn't stay on top of his low back, or stay up on his upper back work? What if he becomes trap dominant? His serratus stops working, his rhomboids, things like low trap start activating, things like that, and he starts getting shoulder issues down the line. So like you have to keep an eye on these kids too, and you have to understand the mechanisms of their specific injuries, what they are, and understand the mechanisms of the injury itself. And okay, what is this kid going to need down the line? Because again, some of these kids, it never changes. Like it never changes in their knees, and they're going to need things down the line. So it's not just, hey, you wash your hands of it, you wipe your hands of it, and you're done with it. A lot of these kids are going to need you too. And I think the other piece of it too is, like you just kind of mentioned, of taking the red jersey off, is people often neglect the psychological fact of return to play with these kids, because the amount of time you spend with these kids in the office, like especially when they get close to return to sport, return to play, and you're kind of finding their confidence with them, helping convincing them that, hey, you're ready to do this, and showing them and giving them the confidence to return to play. Because it's different, especially when you have kids that are ACLs or ACL, LCL, these major knee reconstructions, things like that, they spend more than a year out of competition. They almost forget how to play the game because they lose that sense of feel because it's been so long since they've been in that rhythm of it. So I think that's the biggest missing piece that, again, when you talk about taking the red jersey off, I think that's the biggest piece, the psychological piece you're always working with these kids on.
No, totally. But I think that one thing that could help with that is the fact that going back to, your discussions with Coach Vermeil, like people love to sit here and talk about, because it's cool now to talk about reverse engineering the sport. And we talk about
Big buzzword.
Oh yeah, it's super sexy right now. But it's like, we reverse engineer the sport and this is what we do. Well, but kind of like when we were talking about coming back from COVID, if we have even come back from it yet, I mean, who the hell knows where we are right now. But when you look at these things, people are like, oh, well, you have to be able to do X, Y, and Z to do the sport. So we need to do that. Well, you need to prepare yourself to prepare yourself. And I think that that's something that, like, for a long time, us old heads, like, that's all we used to talk about, right? Like, everything is GPP, blah, 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 blah. But like, that general stuff needs to build into the stuff that allows them to do the stuff that helps them to be better at the sport. And I think that's super important, especially in the situation that we're talking about today.
Absolutely. When you look at it again, I would agree that, yeah, our nature of the profession, what we do for the kids, yes, everything is in general. But when you talk about like specific preparation for the kids and things like that, like it could be as simple as exercise progression, velocity of movement, things like that, limb lengths, different things like that, angles of positions you're training them. And this all could become specific and however you deem it based on the specific kid. And so when you look at it that way, for me, that's kind of how I look at it. I think it's all specific to that individual kid in terms of what's specific, what's SPP, what's GPP. Because again, you could argue everything we do is general in nature, but there's also a specific preparatory process to that. I would agree with both sides of it. But again, like especially in return to play, like I again would say that it's individual to the kid. But first, you have to address what the injury is. How am I going to progress the injury, and how do I get them close to the sport? What the demands of the sport? Yes, that is true, but it doesn't have to be a hang clean, power clean, snatch, back squat, box squat, whatever you do. We're just training them to achieve a stimulus to drive performance. How we get that doesn't matter, whether it's a trap bar jump or med ball tosses. Like I've had low back kids who, in our program here, we love Olympic lifting. We sprint, we jump, we throw med balls. And the reality of it is some of these kids, like I have a low back kid now who will never Olympic lift again. He'll never pull a bar off the floor because that gives him specific low back pain. But the reality is he front squats, he does weighted box jumps, he does med ball throws, he sprints, and he does jump, and he does elastic work. What else does he need? He's still getting the stimulus he needs. He's still getting explosive strength, reactive strength, elastic strength, maximal strength, all these different pieces. Just because there's a different means to the end doesn't mean it's wrong. And I think that's where a lot of people lose the scope of return to play and the training in itself. We can't be married to exercises or specific ways of getting there, but we have to be married to the results of the performance.
I think that what you just said right there is extremely valuable, right? And that is the fact that at the end of the day, it's not the means that matters, it's the stimulus that matters, because that's what drives the adaptation. And I think that connects directly into the last part of the return to play, and that's the psychological aspect. Because if they understand that and they see how these connections and this progress has been made, you would hope at least that they have more confidence going into the situation.
Absolutely. And when you think about that, I know it's something I talk about Rob Panarello all the time, is the number one factor for a lack of return to play or of where it falls through is a kid's fear of loading. Now, it doesn't mean you have to load the bar up all the time and they have to squat heavy, pull heavy, all these different things. No. But do they feel comfortable accepting force, transferring force, whether it's putting weight on the bar, maximal sprinting? Do they feel confident in those avenues and those events? Because if they don't, then the idea of getting them back in the sport and getting them back into competition is pointless, because they're not going to be ready. They're going to be subject to injury. There's going to be all different kind of backdoor things that you're not going to be ready for. You're not going to be expected because anytime they're going to think they're limited, they're going to hold back and there's going to result in injury. So within itself, so the fear of loading and accepting force, transferring force, and maximal output within the demands of the sport are extremely important. And that's the biggest thing for me when I ask myself, is this kid ready to go? Is this kid ready to return to sport? Can this kid drive maximal force in every capacity that we ask him to, whether it's sprinting, jumping, lifting, and anything in sport mimicking training that we might do, whether it's position conditioning, things like that.
Yeah. And I think that at the end of the day, if you can't do the things that you deem are going to be the building blocks for those specific things at a high level, and we can get into the technical mastery and all of that on another day, because I think that that's something that people still overlook excessively, and they just think about load and outputs, but old man talking. If you're not able to do the building block things and we go too fast to the cutesy specific things, you're really, pun intended, hamstringing them.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, before you kind of address like a hamstring specifically, like people ask me, they look at like some of the return to play stuff I put on paper. They ask when they watch a kid I'm training, like, that doesn't look super complicated. And like, it's really not. Sometimes it's really not, especially early on in training. Like, if you ever get a kid to where you can kind of get them to a peaking phase and you keep them for a long time, and there's not a lot of clouded time in your training within people pulling at different strings and affecting the training process, then most of the time it's going to be pretty general, because again, you're talking about a detrained athlete who already has a lower training age than what you would expect in the rest of the team. The rest of the team already probably has a young training age. So again, like, the means to the end can be very simple. And again, it's the details in the coaching and how you're progressing them, what you see, the understanding the load, understanding the outputs, and how to get them there. And then when you look at, again, like you look at the hamstring specifically, I think a lot of times people kind of misguided in how they look at it, to where they think, okay, this kid can squat, this kid can clean, he's ready to go. Okay, cool. But what are the neuromuscular demands of the injury itself? Like, what does the athlete need to do? If they're an Olympic lifter, okay, cool. He can squat, he can clean, he can snatch, no pain. He's ready to go. But when you start talking about elite level wide receivers, elite level DBs, or running backs, depending on the offense and things like that, like, can he handle the demands of the sport? Okay. Is he within 90% of his maximal output? You've seen him on GPS with in terms of max velocity. Can he reach that 90% threshold to drive speed? Can he hit that? Because, you know, a lot of times these kids aren't going to hit it in practice unless there's a freak of a play, and it does happen. But the biggest thing I've seen with those guys is repeatability. Can they understand the volume of practice? Can they understand the that gray area of intensity above that 75% threshold, or really above that 85, those HSR, those high speed running yardage that you get with a lot of those open field positions, especially on Tuesdays or on game days or scrimmages? Can they handle a lot of those? Those are some of the biggest things I see with return to play hamstring specifically is the duration capacity of the hamstring, and can they accept repeatable efforts of the hamstring within sprint practice, especially when you understand the demands of the sport and the demands of your coaching staff, whether they have long practices. Do they undulate their weeks, or do they follow a model? Like, what are they doing? Does your staff like grind these kids in the ground all the time? Does the kid do a ton of extra work on his own that you don't know about? These are all the different things you have to ask yourself.
Yeah, dude. And I think that touches on something else that I think is something that people are starting to get a better look at and a better understanding of. And that's, you know, the over under, right? Like, you have to be able to hit, you know, velocities above what you're going to have to hit in the game, because more often than not, I mean, like you said, in football, you usually don't hit max V. In basketball, you almost never do, but you've got to be able to withstand intensities above, and you got to be able to do repeatability work below to build the foundation so that you're able to handle the parameters of practice in the sport. And that's just for everybody. That's not if you've got an ACL or a shoulder or a back. That's training.
Absolutely. And beyond just hamstrings, you have to, again, like you said, and again, it's kind of a buzzword of reverse engineer or whatever, but you have to understand the demands of the sport. Is it a slow dogma, middle intensity, gray area sport where there's going to be a ton of volume, not a ton of intensity. They need to be able to withstand that, but they also need to understand the small windows of maximum output they're going to see, especially with football. You think about, okay, with like we talk about receivers, like they're going to spend a ton more time sprinting and being upright. So they're going to have a ton more high speed yards. You can send a ton more of lengthened hamstrings and things like that. So they need to be able to withstand that, even if it's sub-maximal outputs, under 90%, but then at the same time, they need to be able to understand that they need to be able to hit those 90% thresholds under fatigue and under load, because the demands of sport, what they're going to do. And then you look at like a DB where they're going to spend more time on the pedal. There's going to be a ton more hip flexors, a ton more groins, adductors, things like that, where they'd be bent over more. But so are they going to have those injuries? But at the same time, what happens when they have to turn around with the receiver? Are they prepared enough to be able to hit those high speeds, those velocities, and be able to open up when they need to and get tall and get vertical? And these are all questions you have to ask yourself. Are they prepared? Are they prepared for it? Or what does a Tuesday practice look like? What does a Wednesday practice look like? What does a fast Friday look like? What does a game day look like? And what is this kid able to handle at the moment? And if he's not able to get where he needs to be, how do we get them? How do we get them there? Be able to understand the demands and accept those.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that, that even goes back to just the stuff that you would do in the weight room, right? Like we sit here and we look at it, right? And you're talking about a wide receiver, for example. Like they're not going to make a lot of huge hitting actions where they need to be strong in a pressing movement and this, that, and the third. But they're going to have to jam in on a DB. They're going to have to block somebody in the run game. So does that mean you don't bench them much? Like you're not going to try to get these guys strong in their upper body because you don't do it often? Again, it's looking at these top and bottom areas of what their outputs are, right? And making sure they're able to go above and below. And I think that people all too often, because I think above can be scary, right? Because that's like high speed running, heavy lifting, blah, 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 like things people may be afraid of at times. And low is just so tedious that it gets boring, right? It's just repeat, 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 repeat. And I think at the end of the day, that's what's kind of starting to separate people, and at least in my opinion, is that they're able to touch those high things without putting them in a bad spot. And they have the patience to be able to do the repeatable things over and over and over because they know it's what's best.
Well, I think when you look at it, it's the ebbs and flows of training. You have to understand what's going on, what the desired outputs are, what are the desired traits you're going after. And yeah, sometimes training is boring. Like this, as I've heard a lot of people say in the past, it's not a strength coach's job, athletic performance job, is to keep the kids occupied and keep them entertained. To say it's to drive output. So first and foremost is the ebbs and flows of training and understanding what do the highs look like, what do the lows look like, and what are the results? What are the trickle down effects of those? What are the residual effects? Whether it's work capacity, explosive strength, all these different things, and how much can we do, or how little can we do to get those effects, and how we do those. Because again, like you just like you spoke on, it's training above and training below that's going to help those things, and being able to understand those, because again, we're chasing desired results and adaptations, and how we get there doesn't matter. But as long as we get there, we're keeping the kids healthy. That's what matters. Are they strong? Are they explosive? Are they reactive? Or do they have high work capacity where they can recover? They can handle chronic loads and things like that of sport and what they're doing. All these different questions we have to ask ourselves. Are we giving them the best opportunity to be successful in their sport? And just like and I know before I get on too much of a rant, just like when people argue about max velocity. Well, football is sub-maximal. Our sport is sub-maximal. We don't open up and sprint. Okay, cool. But like research has shown us through Ken Clark and these other people that max velocity is one of the highest outputs of training and neural outputs we can have. The acceleration profile being increased because of max velocities and from Ken Clark's research. And you talk about rate coding, motor unit recruitment, all these different things, elastic reactive qualities. Like, what do coaches most say for? I want a fast, explosive, agile athlete. Okay, cool. How do we get that? It's not from squatting heavy. Does squatting help drive some of those concepts? Yeah, we need to be able to do it for force acceptance and maximal strength. That is a part of it. But then it's in itself, like how, like again, it doesn't matter how we get there as long as we get the effects.
It doesn't matter how we get there as long as we get the effects. Yes. Like, I think that, and this will probably need to be a rant at some point, but like strength coach Twitter would argue a trillion days to Sunday that that's wrong, but there probably hasn't been a truer thing said. Like no one cares if you are a believer in wickets or boom booms or extensive running exercises or whatever. If your kids are getting faster, your kids are getting faster.
I mean, really, that's what really is what it comes down to. And it's, this week we've seen a lot of people arguing on social media, and I've talked to my boss about it quite a bit. Like, what's the point of it? Okay, if you're putting the kids at risk and you're putting health and safety at risk, okay, then you really need to ask yourself, like, do I need to go work in construction, or do I really need to be a strength coach? Because first and foremost, like, player safety, player health is the number one what we're doing. Like, we're trying to keep them out, the ability to play their sport. But again, like, it's a means to an end. Like, how we get there doesn't matter. As long as we're driving output and we're driving injury resiliency, and for them to be competent and confident in their sport and give sport coaches what they want, and our supportive role that we have, that's what matters. At the end of the day, that's all that matters, regardless of what your opinion is and how to get there, because everybody's situation is different. What if I want to do snatches, but I inherited a team full of wrist injuries with broken wrists and things like that? My kids can't turn the bar over when they get to a catch. Okay, so how am I going to force a snatch on them? No, because I'm putting them at an adverse risk on the shoulder or the elbow in terms of compensation. Okay, do I really want to Olympic lift? Cool, maybe I'll do some pulls. Or can I get the same output doing med ball throws and trap bar jumps and weighted jumps and kettlebell, however the hell you want to do it? That's the question you have to ask yourself: is what do I need to get done, and how do I get there with the athletes I have? Because again, everybody's athletes are different. Every situation is different.
No doubt, brother. Well, listen, Zach, let me get you out of here on this, homie. Where can people keep up with you and see more of what you're doing down there?
So they can find me on Twitter. They can find me on Instagram. It should be coach_Zach32. They can email me. My email should be on our staff director. It should be zhigginbotham@fau.edu. They're more than welcome to email me. If you know me or know somebody that knows me, you can reach out and get my number. I'm not going to be too weirded out if you call me or shoot me a text. I enjoy talking to people and learning more. So as long as you just don't order anything in my name and charge money to my account, I'll be okay. But those probably get a hold of me.
Awesome, bro. Well, listen, Zach, this is sensational, man. Truly appreciate your time, and we'll be in touch real soon.
Appreciate you, Jay.
Yeah, man. Cheers. Thank you.
You too.